welcome to the Red Barrels Podcast, episode 41. Yeah, I had to kind of scan my eyes around my screen to find where I'd written the number down, and it's number 41, and I found it. So so everything was fine. Don't worry. I know you were worried for a sec that I'd forgotten.
I was.
I would not be able to retrieve the episode number. But I defied all your concerns. You can go back to putting your undivided trust into me, one of your hosts, Alex. You know, the one talking right now. Who else is here? Who else is here and will be talking?
I'm talking.
I'm here.
Wow.
Talking at the same time. Whoa.
Wow.
I'm Ed.
Usually I think we've largely managed to avoid that over 41 episodes. And it finally happened. So, this is history.
Alex, you let Sofie go first last time. I want to go first. It's not fair. I'm Ed, and I'm on the podcast. And do you know who also is technically on the podcast, I guess?
Me, I guess. Whatever, Ed. I'm Sofie. They saved the best for last, so whatever.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
First the worst, second the best.
Oh, shit.
Etc.
I got fucked over. Oh, shit. Ed's been playing us
You
from the
start. Checkmate, atheist.
Unbelievable. We're all just a pawn
More or
in his
less.
game. And you know what? There's that kind of vibe. That kind of, well, we can't trust anyone, certainly not Ed, but anyone else either. And you got to look out for daggers around every corner. That is exactly in the game we're talking about today. That's right. We're only talking about one game. It's a one-game Blowout episode where all three of us have played the game, and the game we are talking about is Zero Parades, sometimes called Zero Parades: For Dead Spies. Although in the promotion there was also a bunch of other things that went after colon. But that doesn't matter. We're just going to call it Zero Parades. Don't worry about it. This game is from Zaum. Zaum of Zalmageddon fame, the famous recurring item on our show, in which we recount the travails of the developer who made Disco Elysium and the Fallout, and all the people who left for various reasons, mainly not of their own accord or of their own wishes, that studio, and what they're doing and what's going on with Zaum. Well, one of those games has finally come to fruition, and it is Zaum's own Zero Parades. I should just to address the kind of controversy about this game. We've talked about it a lot. We talked about this when we spoke to Springman Parlin Jones from the IWGB Games Workers a few episodes ago, who has recently helped unionize Zaum. And, there is a lot of antipathy towards this game on the basis that the bosses of Zaum basically, allegedly, maybe, who knows, it seems, at the very least, we know that they have control over the IP of Disco Elysium, and the people who actually made the IP, Robert Kurwitz and a bunch of others, they no longer have any power over it, and that is not generally a political situation that we would like. Let's just say that. The legalities of it we leave to others. And this has led to a lot of people to be very, very skeptical of Zaum's game, and our kind of position that we've staked out is that, well, we're going to give them a fair shot. And if you believe in the ideology of Disco Elysium, which I would say that we genuinely do, it's probably right that you give the UK's first ever unionized game studio a fair shout. A lot of decent people worked on that game. The bosses don't make the games, the workers make the games. So it's worth giving it a go. But, I think also we're going to be fair on it. If we don't think it's good, we didn't think it's good, we've played it already. We've already formed opinions, but you will find them out soon. But we'll tell you if we don't think it's good. We're not going to sugarcoat it. But at the same time, we're not going to rail against it sight unseen either. Why don't we start off just talking about what the game is straight off. So this game is essentially the follow-up to Disco Elysium, and in kind of structure and basic gameplay, it's quite similar. It's an isometric RPG without clear combat. There is some sort of combat that happens in the game, but it's all worked out through dice rolls and various systems. There are some different systems to Disco Elysium in this game, but it's if you've played Disco Elysium, you'll be very familiar playing this game and the way it generally works. And we'll be getting into that as well a bit. the setting of the game is, it's a completely different, it's not continuation Disco Elysium at all, in large part for legal reasons, but it is a completely different world, and you play as Herschel, aka Cascade, who is a spy in the city of Portofino, which exists in a kind of junction between the three main powers of the fictional world it's set in, one of which is the communist superbloc where your spy is from. There's also MTER, which is basically essentially liberal capitalists. And then the third one is La Luz, who are techno-fascists. And you have to kind of negotiate a mystery, find out exactly what's going on. Eventually, you are given a task to do by your handlers, a specific task that you have to carry out over the course of the game, and negotiating between various other spies and factions and so on, and dealing with your own personal memories of 5 years previously in this town where you'd been a spy there with a crew and things went terribly wrong and everything fell apart. And you kind of have to get together with your remaining crew and deal with them and maybe recruit them or maybe not, depending on how you do things, and eventually complete an objective by the end of the game. And that's pretty much how it works out. So why don't we just start off saying what your kind of expectations and kind of hopes going into the game were?
Well, I very much enjoyed Disco Elysium. I guess I was hoping for more of the same sort of stuff. I was hoping for something that I wouldn't be able to predict myself ahead of the game. Do you know what I mean? Like Disco Elysium, maybe with like something else that I don't know what it would be. I was hoping that the politics would remain pretty consistent from Disco Elysium, and that the sort of basic gameplay would also remain the same. Sofie, what were you expecting? Or what were you hoping for?
Yeah. So I am the one member of the podcast who's still not played Disco Elysium all the way through. I know. But I was kind of hoping that with this game that I would have an experience that made me want to play the game more than I did Disco Elysium, which, like, I guess, I will get into details later. I don't know. I feel like I had kind of a similar experience. So we'll talk about why, and it's not because I think the game is bad. I do think that I was hoping for the thing I think I was probably on the lookout for the most was the writing, because the writing in Disco Elysium is phenomenal. Like, it is just so it's such well written prose, and it really feels like reading quite a dense novel at times. So I think, like, I was hoping that the writing would be as good. I was very sort of on high alert where I was like, am I going to feel like it's the writing's as good? And I do feel like the prose are still excellent. I was looking forward to some more incredible voice performances from Disco like Disco as well. And I feel like that was delivered upon as well. But yeah, those were my sort of expectations going into it, were excellent writing, excellent voice performances, as you say, like stellar politics. But yeah, I was kind of hoping that it would motivate me a bit more than Disco did to play it, which is where I struggled with it a little bit. But yeah, going back to you.
Well, I'd say, I mean, I think I laid out when we spoke to Spring in the previous episode what my kind of expectations were for the game. I suppose my hope was that it would be a transcendent piece of art, of communist art, like Disco Elysium was. I guess I didn't realistically think that was going to happen. I kind of thought it would probably be decent to good, with writing that was not as good as Disco Elysium, and politics that were also not as good as Disco Elysium. And to be honest, I feel quite vindicated. I think that pretty much is what the game is. I also predicted that the game would be an allegory for all the nonsense that happened with the Zalm. And I guess I'll get into that later on, but I also think I was vindicated on that as well. So I'm fully vindicated, everyone. Yeah! Yeah, so what do we, I mean, I kind of went into it a bit there, but what do we think of the game in general? Did we like it? Were we disappointed? Did it live up to our hopes?
Do you want to start, Sofie?
Yeah. So I think out of all of us, I've made the least progress in the game. I've played about 12 hours, which is not nothing, but also, arguably not enough to get the full experience. I had a long conversation with a friend of mine about this, because I really do, and I had the same problem with Disco, where I just don't enjoy playing them that much. And that feels kind of sinful to admit. I feel like especially with a lot of, leftists particularly are so precious about this game that almost admitting it, that I just don't find it that fun or enjoyable to play. That being said, I think we've discussed on previous podcasts that I do not think that a game has to be fun. I do not think that it has to be enjoyable. So I don't think that I think for whatever reason, I think it's not fun for me in particular. I not me only, because I've met other people who have this experience with the game. I know one of the regular listeners of the podcast, who's a friend of mine, also has this experience with the game, who had this experience with Disco that just, it really took a lot of effort for me to want to sit down and play it. And even this time around with Zero Parades, for me, it really was just like, oh, I have to go put some time into Zero Parades because we're doing it for the podcast. I have to go and sort of plug some time away at it. So I was really trying to, dissect what it is about the game that I just don't enjoy, because I do think it's a me issue. I think it is a universally well-loved game in the case of Disco. Like, people like it. I believe people like it for a reason. There's loads of elements that I do really love about it and find very addictive when I do play it. But I just do not keep coming back. I really have to force myself to keep coming back. And I'm like, why is that? One of the key things for me is I just don't really like detective games.
Oh, really?
I don't really like detective games. And I kind of had this realization recently. I do not like detective games. I would never touch like blueprints with a 10-foot pole. I don't really like puzzle games that much either. Not a huge puzzle game person generally. And detective games in particular, I find that usually they just have so many moving parts that I feel like I have to keep track of, that it just sort of starts to lose the enjoyment for me. I don't believe that a game should have to hold my hand, but I sort of really struggle to keep track of certain elements, to the point of experiencing quite a bit of frustration with games like these, where like I was doing note keeping this time. I was trying to like note keep so that I could be like, okay, I'll keep track of this particular thread. And I was really proud of myself for like, when I had a conversation with one person, I was like, cool, I'm going to go to the sort of housing estate. I'm going to have a look for a particular person. And then when I decided to do that, I came across 3 people blocking the path. And I was like, okay, cool. That was the thing I was going to do in this session today. Okay, cool. I guess I'll go find another thread to follow. And I've tried to follow another thread and then remember to come back to that in like 3 hours when something happens. And naturally, I feel like I will just get distracted by thread to thread to thread to thread in a way that feels antithetical to how the game is supposed to be played. But I also don't really know how the game is supposed to be played. I don't think there is one prescriptive way for games like this to be played. I think it does encourage you to kind of like choose silly choices and do the unexpected things sometime. But for some reason, when it comes to games like this, Disco, I had this experience, I always feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. I always feel like I'm investigating the wrong thread. I feel like I'm following the wrong characters. I feel like I'm making the wrong choices. I don't know what it is about these games that make me very, very self-conscious about how I'm playing them, that I feel like I'm missing out on 80% of the game because I'm choosing to do the wrong, like 20% or something like that. There's just something about it. And like I said, I don't think it's any flaw with the gameplay itself. I think I've enjoyed, well, I guess not really enjoyed, but like I was sort of immersed in the story a lot of the time. I found the writing was pretty good. I was interested to see what happened. I was like, I want to know what happened to this previous group of people, especially when I learned about the other agents, that I was going to have to go around and recruit the other agents. I was like, oh, cool. That's like a really easy mission for me to follow and like threads for me to go and investigate. That's nice and easy for me to keep track of. And yet, it just took so much effort for me to start up the game. And I'm not really sure why. I think for me, it does just kind of feel like a dense novel in the way that it's like, yeah, I probably would, get a lot out of this novel if I finished it, but it is the sort of novel where I have to sit down and make myself read 15 minutes a day, that I'm not necessarily enjoying the process of going through it. There's also something that feels very weirdly vulnerable about admitting not really jamming with Disco Elysium or Zero Parades in this case. That again, it's like so many leftists love it. I also feel like, I've said this before, like I don't like playing it on stream because there's a lot of pressure to understand the politics, to understand the sort of real life metaphors and the real life references. I feel like there's a lot of pressure to intellectually get on with the game. that it just kind of takes away from my enjoyment. So I do not like playing it on stream, but I did get a free key to play this game, to be clear. And I did play it on stream for that reason. And I did play a lot of it offline as well. And it is a much more enjoyable experience offline. And yet I do still somehow feel self-conscious, even if it's just me in a room. I'm like, I feel like I should really like this game, and I just don't really jam with it. So I think, yeah, I kind of just had to to come to terms with that and admit to myself where I was like, yeah, I think that Disco and Zero Parades, I keep talking about both of them, but I just think that it's a problem that they both have for me, that I was just like, I was really hoping, my expectations were that Zero Parades would be different, that I would be so motivated to continue. And I would say that I was a little more motivated. I feel like I got hit with, stop signs less often than in Disco, where I still don't know how the fuck I can get the body down from the tree in Disco. All these years later, and I've seen so many people play that game. I don't know when that happens. And I think for me, it was kind of like a disappointment on that front in terms of like the main expectation I had with that be like, oh, this is finally my opportunity to like get into a game like this, to really sort of get into it at the same time that everyone else has without the expectations of the game that maybe everyone else has. Yeah, and I still kind of struggled. I don't know. It's a long-winded thing. But yeah.
Well, Sophie, I mean, I think you can be rest assured that Ed and I, we still love you and we're your friends. But at the show trial, we will both enthusiastically denounce you as a reactionary who didn't like Disco Elysium.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's just an inevitability. But for now, we're fine.
That's fair.
We're fine.
That's fair. I am gonna go and become a trad wife, so that's yeah.
That'd be even worse. Maybe when you're a trad wife, you'll actually like Disco Elysium.
Maybe when I'm a trad wife, I'll have
that'll unlock it somehow. Ed, what did you think?
I really liked it. I thought it was really, really good. I think the politics were interesting, but less to us, probably, I would say, than Disco Elysium was. But I really enjoyed the geopolitics element of it. I thought at least two of the three of those were very well done and interesting. I guess we'll probably talk about that in a bit. I thought that just purely gameplay wise, I thought it iterated on Disco Elysium in a way which sort of improved it in some ways.
I would agree with that.
For example, there are a number of points in Disco Elysium when I've only played it once, or my first playthrough, therefore, where I didn't really know what to do next. I think that's kind of the stuff that you're talking about, Sophie.
It does do it better.
Disco Elysium,
Zero Praise absolutely does that better, yeah.
Yeah, and for me in Disco Elysium, that happened especially quite early on in the game, and then maybe later in the game it happened less. With Zero Parade, there was a bit in the game where it happened, but it was very near the end. So by that point, I'm already very invested in the game. There's no risk of me stopping. I'm talking 20 hours into a 25-hour game. I'm in at that stage. So I think that was definitely an improvement. And even just stuff like the UI updates, I liked how the UI looked. I liked the little purple indicator that there's an update that you should look at in the menu. The way that the interface kept track of the various threads, I found that to be much more useful to use than it was in Disco Elysium. I did keep notes. I used the same notebook that I used for blueprints. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, actually, feeling like a detective. So again, that speaks to the different taste element here, but feeling like I was solving just not just what's happening directly in the story, but working out what the geopolitics are of the game, who is what is Lelou's, what is M tier, what is the super block, and how do they interrelate and all that kind of stuff. I really enjoyed that stuff. I thought the game was really well written. Maybe it doesn't quite it didn't hit me exactly I didn't have the strong feeling about it in exactly the same way that I did with Disco Elysium. It doesn't quite speak to exactly our interest in it. But I think it was really, really strong, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who thinks it sounds vaguely interesting. Would be my take. Great game. Less good politics, but still pretty good as far as politics go. Just less fantastic than Disco Elysium. Alex, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'd say it was good. I feel it's probably an unfair criticism or comparison, I should say. But I don't know if either of you ever watched the Netflix version of Cowboy Bebop that they made, the live action version of Cowboy Bebop. people really hated that. And I don't think it was very good either. But I remember thinking at the time that the problem with this is that it's worse in every single way compared to the original anime. But if this was, if this just came out of nowhere, if the anime never existed, I bet this would have like a real fan base of people who's just like, wow, I thought it was really cool and unique and stuff. But it didn't. It was based on the anime. And it was like constantly riffing and referencing the anime, and it didn't work because of that. And I feel a little similar about this game. If you took it completely of its own, I think it was a very good game overall, very unique and even politically pretty interesting politically, and it's got some interesting stuff. I'd probably be, I don't know if I'd be a fan, but I'd be, oh yeah, good game. But because of the connection to Disco Elysium, and the issue is really, it's not like, I'm not just being unfair because it comes from ostensibly the same studio, but even very few of the same people. But like, there's some of the same people, but like, to a certain degree, you'd say one could argue it isn't actually connected to Disco Elysium at all. The problem is that this game is made by people who really want to make the next Disco Elysium, and they are actively there are elements of it they feel they have to live up to, and they have to include in the game. And there are a lot of things in the game that are only there because of Disco Elysium, and I think all of those are kind of worse. And I mean, I think I basically agree with the actual gameplay. The gameplay system has a new kind of, the original Disco Elysium had a system where there was like psyche and health, and you could lose points in that. And if you went down to 0 of either of those, you basically just got game over and you had to go to your last save. And you could top them up with like drink or drugs or doing various other things, go to sleep. And in this game, you've got a more elaborate system where there's 3 different things for like fatigue and what was the other 2? Anxiety and
I did enjoy that,
yeah.
actually. I found that kind of baffling when I started, but I did actually really enjoy that of like having to. Sorry, I just realized that like I haven't. I will occasionally interject because I feel like I didn't
No,
comment on
it's fine.
things that I like that much. But yes, I really enjoyed that, and having to sort of manage that with things that you pick up on the way. It took me a while to sort of get the hang of it because I lost like 2 skill points in video. So I was like,
Yeah.
what the fuck is happening? Because I just didn't even really like notice the bars in the bottom left corner. But once I got the hang of it, I found that really engaging. Anyway.
Yeah. The third one is Delirium.
I did
Yes.
really like that as well, actually. I want to throw that in there. I'm always a big fan in games of when the failure state is not just a game
Yes,
over. Like there's some
yeah.
actual consequences that
Yes.
persist from you playing, like, let's say, like suboptimally earlier in the game, or like if you do a bad job or make strange decisions, like your character will suffer. And I just quickly, I'll come back to you in a second, Alex, but like, a testament to how much I liked Disco Elysium was that I did not like save scum at any moment in the whole game. It felt like to me that would be like disrespectful of how much I respected Disco Elysium and like was enjoying it and was caught up in the story. And I did have the same thing in Zero Parade. Like I did not save scum. Like I just when, and trust me, I got really shafted on some dice rolls at certain points. But I guess I'll talk about that later maybe. But like, I just respected the game too much, and that I believe the consequences should persist. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, I just
back to you.
just to be clear, the way those 3 bar systems work is that when you, instead of running out, you fill them up, and when you fill them up, you permanently lose a point in one of your skills, basically. So that means, there's no game over, but the game is now a bit harder, or it depends on how maybe you could say it's a more gritty experience or something. If you can completely divorce yourself from, hey man, I'm just rolling with the rolls, man. I'm not going to save scum or anything. Like, I have to admit, I did a bit of save scumming at the end of this game, basically. But that's partly because of like, I think why I really realized what I felt about the game, which was basically, because we've had this big gap in episodes, because I've been moving, it's been 6 weeks or something, and I have had downtime in the evenings and stuff. So I could have played this game, and I just kept not playing it. I kept putting it off over and over again, even though I did have time to play it. And I should have finished it like weeks ago, but instead I finished it last night. And so last night I did some save scumming because I was just like, I really don't want to miss this thing. And then have this drag on further. I have to get this done tonight. So I think that just says a lot that partly that's my own fault a little bit because the game I played before this was Disco Elysium again. So doing them back to back
You really
was
had them back to
probably
back, yeah.
a bit fatiguing. But I still I got to the end of Disco Elysium. I was eager to play that. I was like excited to go, get back to some more disco. And this one I wasn't, and it's hard to say exactly why that is. I think there's I think the writing is a bit worse. It's still very good as far as game writing goes, but partly because there are elements that are kind of aping Disco Elysium. It feels like they wanna have a disco-like style, but they can't really
Mm.
manage to get there. I know, it just doesn't grab me. I think there are certain problems, like the fact that the character you play, Herschel, she is alone pretty much for the whole game. You run around as her by herself. In Disco Elysium, you had Kitsuragi following you around. And I talked about how much I love Kim, and he's amazing. But even without his actual, the great character he just has a gameplay purpose in that you can bounce things off him. He explains things to you as you go through the game. And the fact that
He comments on the decisions that you
comments
make.
on that, he will imply certain things about what's going on, things like that. He really kind of eases you into it. Whereas in this game, it's just like, well, you've got nothing. And that, I think, especially early on, really kind of drags on me, that kind of lack of that kind of connection with someone. I mean, I'll get into the politics in a bit, but I was quite disappointed with the politics. While there is some interesting politics in there's interesting things to talk about. I have some, especially as the game went on, I got increasingly bigger reservations with it. I guess it basically, this is not a game made by Marxists like the last game was. This is a game made by, whatever. It's kind of in the realm of something, now it's close to the realm of something like, I don't know, The Outer Worlds or something like that.
Mm.
Of a game that's like kind of left leaning. It's got some interesting politics in it, but I mean, ultimately, I'd say it's probably lit. And, considering that the first game was again, the Marxist video game practically. I mean, there are others, but, this is towers above them, pretty much. And the fact I think the fact that you play as a spy from a communist country or alliance, or exactly what they are, I'm not entirely sure, but the super bloc, I mean, that is basically just because to remind you of Disco Elysium. That is the only real reason that is the case. There's very little that is based on any of that has much bearing on the plot. And it's just full of things like that. I know I feel like I'm being a bit down on it. I think there is a lot to like about this game, and a lot to love even. I think it can be a very pretty game. I think visually it's a little one note. Everything's kind of this kind of dark grey. I feel like when I think about playing this game, it's just the same color the entire time. But individually, the art of the city is very nice and interesting. I think the city itself is really cool. Probably a more interesting place, at least kind of in layout and structure and things going on than Martinez in Disco Elysium. I think the characters in general are very well written and acted. I didn't like the narrator. I think the narrator is quite divisive. I'm not sure what you guys thought of the narrator. I thought she it sounded like the actor doing it was kind of trying too hard, really kind of going, really kind of a bit of an overwrought performance, I thought. Although by the end of the game, I kind of got over it, but I thought it was a bit much.
I liked it, actually. It grew on me. I think
You
at
really think
first
so?
I was just like, oh, it feels a bit like. I guess the sort of first thought was like, oh, it feels kind of nasally. But then we actually talked about it on stream where I was like, I feel like, and I'm not accusing you of this, but I do feel like a lot of the discontent about it might be a little bit of internalized misogyny of just
It could be, yeah.
preferring a man's voice to a woman's voice. She does have quite a nasal voice for a female voice actress, but I definitely actually the performance I really enjoyed it. I actually found it quite dynamic. In the beginning I thought it all quite samey, and I was like, everything's said like this.
Yeah,
It's all really dramatic.
That's pretty
pretty
good.
good. That's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then eventually, sort of as I got further into the game, I found it did actually get quite sort of varied, and I felt like that was actually a part of the performance, that like the more memories I unlocked, I felt like the more personality was coming out of the performance.
Yeah.
Especially when she was describing Cascade's, memories around town that she was sort of slowly unlocking. It felt like the performance got really dynamic in those moments, and I actually really enjoyed that in the end.
Yeah. It's not, but I'd say I did get used to it, but I just I did feel I felt like the previous guy, the previous performance, the
Famously
narrator,
good voice.
the narrator,
There was also no meeting those. There's no filling those
in the
shoes,
narrator in the
right?
Disco Elysium, I think he does like an amazing voice, but I don't think he does like a particularly good like performance. I think it's just kind of like they just got a guy with a great voice to read out. Like
I think he does an incredible performance.
Well, I just think I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm not like I wasn't like moved by it particularly. Like I think he's the kind of guy who can just read this phone book and sound amazing, right? Whereas it felt like the actor doing the narrator in this was just like really kind of like, okay, I'm gonna really, really, really go for it. And I think, and I understand I can appreciate the motive there, but I think she just went a bit too for it. Should have dialed it back in a little bit. Sorry, Ed, I think you're about to say something.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say what you just said, basically. I mean, about the narrator in the first game. I mean, I also found the narrator, like, distracting at the start of the game, and then from very early on, the narrator just, like, became part of the game for me. I didn't think about the narrator as anything separate from the rest of the experience. So from that point of view, I think the narrator was good. Like, the narrator wasn't as, like, great and iconic as the narrator in the previous game, but
again massive shoes to fill. It's impossible, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think she did a good job, and I think she brought a very like specific energy to it, like kind of almost like a punk kind of like there was like a sort of
fuck yourself
the way
type of
there was a certain appeal to it in the end. Like it did grow.
Oh, yes, I kind of
definitely wasn't an issue.
Punks. So that's probably.
You can't say that. We're lefties.
Plenty of not terribly lefty. Look, have you seen Johnny Rotten recently, mate? Come on. Yeah. So why don't we just kind of dive into the politics? We're dancing around it. Everyone knows that's what the people are here to listen to, right? They want to hear us what we thought about the politics. Ed, you've kind of alluded to politics a bit. What did you want to get into a bit more detail about what you thought about them?
Yeah, sure. So the like main source of the politics, like the main ways in which the politics comes out, is in the presentation of the three like geopolitical entities that Alex has already described. MTER, which stands for Empire Sans Territory, whatever. I don't speak French, all right? Yeah, which, as Alex said, is like the neoliberal faction, the Lelus, the techno-fascists, and the Superbloc. And I thought that Lelus and MTER were very like well-developed and interesting critiques of the things that they were meant to be critiquing, and were very effectively written, and I was very engaged with them. The Superbloc, as Alex has alluded to, are barely a presence in the story, and when they are a presence in the story, I don't feel like that they are well done at all. Maybe this is just my bias showing, but for me, the Superbloc was definitely one of the most disappointing aspects of the game. So the Superbloc are kind of like a stand-in for maybe like a late era USSR. Maybe, I don't know, maybe like Brezhnev or something. And so they sort of stand for an authoritarian strand of socialism, but they're like kind of a tired sort of feeling is what they're meant to be communicating, and they're made up of a series of people's republics. Also, I would say the way that they tie into the gameplay most directly is through this skill you have called statehood, which dictates your chance of success on various like pro Superbloc opinions in conversations. I think the issue for me was that as a commentary on the USSR, it didn't feel like it was any more incisive or interesting than any of the most like bland liberal critiques that we're all so familiar with. Like the pro Superbloc responses and conversations are often given in all caps. They're basically like kind of stupid propaganda like that you're spouting, and they're often basically not very useful at all in a given situation. So like that's presenting the communist perspective on things as being like maybe rote, or maybe like just propagandistic, or maybe like empty of any actual engagement with the conditions, which again doesn't feel like it's not really. I mean, I get what they're gesturing towards, but that's not a particularly interesting thing to gesture towards. One example I would give as well is there's a gameplay feature called unconditioned thoughts, which you can which come up where you can choose to reflect on the unconditioned thoughts, and then it can give you various buffs or debuffs. And one of them is called the People's Republic of La La Land. And if you pursue that unconditioned thought, you say that you have to. The thought tells you that communism is near the top of the global power rankings of delusion, but that in order to adopt it, you have to nevertheless hold fast to the party line, because surely there must be a reward waiting for you at the end. And to me, that again sort of presents communism as this delusional, simple-minded, and even possibly cynical, because thinking about it in terms of reward. And again, it's just very liberal, very blasé, very boring critique of the USSR. I'm not trying to say there's literally no there's nothing to that at all ever, but it's just not a very interesting thing to say. And I would also, while I'm going on their anti-communist element, there's also the character of Nestor, who was the former leader of Portfolio, where the game is set, from long before the game takes place. And Nestor, it was, I guess, kind of basically just a populist who was non-ideological in various ways. He moved between ideologies, and he had a communist period for a bit of time. He was self-declared a communist, but then there was a period before that, and there was a period after that. He gave up on that at one point. So again, that's the game including in not a massively prominent way, but in a semi-prominent way, another person of someone using communism either just cynically or with not really any commitment to it. So again, a bit disappointed by that. Not very subtle, not very interesting engagement with it. And I guess to continue on this point, the other thing is the ideology of the superblock is post-historical materialism. And at least once in the game, they say that the dialectic of the post-historical materialism is basically bad because it fails to account for individual variation. And with obviously post-historical materialism is very, I mean, a clear reference to the real ideology, historical materialism, and saying that, and seeming to imply that historical materialism fails as an ideology because it doesn't account for individual variation. Which again, what a silly critique of historical materialism. So I don't know why they wrote that in the game. That seems like a silly thing to say. And maybe I'm being unfair because maybe the character that said that is an anti-communist rather than the people making the game. But then how does that account for the presence of Nestor and the unconditioned thought, which isn't a separate character in the game, presenting communism as cynical or maybe a bit stupid? Continuing with the superblock thing, what do we know about them? Not much, but we know that they're very brutal. They're very very hard-nosed, very tough, brutal people. They're very brutal. I don't want to get into spoilers, but they're very hard-nosed at the start of the game about the prospect of leaving various agents in difficult situations, for example. Let's say that. They're painted as dogmatic and somewhat nonsensical with, as I say, an ideology that appears to be basically useless. So to bring that all together, whereas the first game, Disco Elysium, felt like it was, I don't know whether the guy's a communist or not, but he's clearly has an understanding of Marxism, and that permeates the entire game. And he clearly has a sort of affection for the Soviet Union in some sense. And this game doesn't feel like that at all. Zero Parades feels like it's a sort of parody of communism from someone who's definitely not a communist and someone who's probably not even that familiar with communism. It includes jokes, for example, where basically the punchline is communists just call everything they don't like bourgeois. Okay, thanks. What a good one. So yeah. Maybe part of that is Disco Elysium is rooted in a situation which is closer to our own, it's a post-fall of the Soviet Union game, whereas Zero Parades is obviously, as I say, Brezhnev era. So Disco Elysium's genre of pro-communism is it's miserable to be a communist. It's sort of what Disco Elysium is saying. This sucks. We're having a really bad time. And it's miserable about the defeat of the Soviet Union is what Disco Elysium feels like. Zero Parades is miserable, but about actually existing, continuing socialism, when the game is set. And presents it as kind of stupid and maybe amoral and basically kind of brutal and bad. So that kind of sucked. And we can get into the other two in a bit because there's loads to say about it. But what do you guys think about the presentation of the sort of communist bloc in Zero Parades?
Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did get that sense again. I don't think I got far enough to sort of really come to the determination that you did. But realizing now, I'm oh yeah, absolutely. I think that was actually a frustration that I kept having where I was my sort of, because I think my statehood ended up being quite high because I had a lot of those, that sort of tree of skills was where I placed most of the points into in the beginning.
Mhm.
Anyway, and I think, yeah, I found most of the options useless, and it did feel very cynical. Yeah, where I was occasionally just like, oh, I was like, I don't know if we're just being, I don't know if we're, it was hard for me to identify if we were just doing a critique, because occasionally it did feel just quite like, I don't know, I identify as a attack helicopter, but sort of error jokes about communism, where it's like,
Yeah.
wow, these are really
Yeah.
just so like, and everyone's gonna live in a brown paper bag, and
Mhm.
we have to
Yeah,
import
yeah.
culture because ours is so bland and we don't make any art and we aren't capable of making good art. And it's like, yeah, just quite tired. And I thought that maybe it was going to come round to a point of being, of maybe putting forward the sort of most obvious critiques up front and then sort of turning around on them later and sort of challenging
Mhm.
those critiques. And obviously, I'm learning that it does not do
No,
that. That it
unfortunately
just
not.
sort of accepts those as a given. Yeah, which is very disappointing because I guess I thought it was doing, because there are definitely moments in like Disco, I feel like, where it's also a little bit tongue in cheek about the communism. It's just like, oh,
Mhm.
but later it sort of directly challenges that. But like, yeah.
Disco Elysium feels mean about communism in the way that you can be mean about a
No,
family member,
exactly. I was about
and
to
it's
say
like
that.
you still love
Yeah,
them.
exactly. Where it's like I can be mean about, I can be mean about it. We can criticize leftists for being like, oh, too cliquey and too, oh, we're constantly sectioning off into 5 different splinter cell groups, etc.
Yeah.
We can make those jokes,
Mhm.
but you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to if you don't actually know the energy and effort required to keep these groups all consistent, right? And the reason why these
And
sort
you
of splinters happen.
and you can tell it apart
Yeah,
as well,
yeah,
like when someone's making that joke from a place of them knowing
yeah.
about
It
it
feels
versus when they're
mean
not. Like
spirited.
it, yeah.
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 It might not be obvious from the outside, like what the difference between the two would be,
Mm,
like, but there is a very real and clear difference.
yeah.
You can very easily
Yeah.
tell where it's coming from
Mhm.
each
Yeah.
time. Sorry, Sophie, go
No.
on.
Yeah, there's a real difference between me being like, oh, my wife, the old ball and chain, and one of your like lad friends being like, your wife is fucking controlling
Such a
and
ball
you're
and chain.
pussy whipped.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, whoa, It's like there's a
Whoa, whoa,
clear
whoa.
difference between these two things, and there's a little bit of misogyny in there, where it's like, oh, you just clearly think I'm a little bit stupid
Mm.
for believing in this. And it does feel, yeah, it is one of those things where it's like, I'm sorry, do you want me to do you realize who you're talking to?
Yeah.
Like, you realize that this is something I genuinely believe in, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I kind of this element of the game I kind of got a bit angry about towards the end of the game.
Mm,
I was pretty
Hmm.
disappointed because basically I realized that one of the problems, it is slightly separate from this, but it feeds into it, is that they give Cascade, Herschel, the character you play, a lot of very similar responses, dialogue responses to what they gave Harry, the character you played in Disco Elysium. And that includes like basically at various times you'll has something will come up and you'll be given a list of basically various different ideological things you can say. And all of them tend to be a bit kind of basic and silly
mm,
and you like regardless of what they are. And in Disco Elysium, that was the same, but that made sense because you played a guy who's like an amnesiac who has just woken up essentially like, Terra Nova, like complete blank slate, and is naive about all politics that exists. So his like when I play it, I play as a communist. Him being a communist is like being the most basic dumb communist, like the guy who turns up to the first meeting of the group or something. He's like, "So are we doing the revolution tomorrow?"
mm,
That kind of guy. And it makes sense for that character. But in
mm,
this game, you get pretty much identical responses to get to say, but you are a hardened spy of decades for an existing
mm. You should be a
communist
bit more well educated
bloc
at this
that has it.
stage.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, she should be like, even if she, the idea, and like, obviously, you should be able to choose how you play her, but the idea you might choose her is like very jaded about communism. That makes
Mm,
sense. You can imagine that for a spy. That's like from practically a million spy thrillers, right? And that, but she'd like know about it, right? She wouldn't be that kind of brain dead
Hmm.
about it. And
mm,
that's just like a kind of an issue with the writing in general. But that kind of leaks into the overall ideology in that there isn't anyone in the game to defend communism as an ideology except you, and the only things you have
Yeah.
to say are these brain dead options. You meet over the course of the game a number of people like who are from the liberals or the fascists who will have dialogues with you, and they'll say you'll see their ideology expressed in what they say, and they'll talk about how bad they think the super bloc is, and you have nothing to say in defense. So
Mm.
it feels like, yeah, they're like this game, like, it feels like there's only communism in it because they knew were making the follow-up to Disco Elysium, but there's no defense of communism in it whatsoever. So it feels like practically they're just ganging up on the communists,
Mm.
even though you're playing as a communist, and they know that a lot of the people who play this game are going to want to, like, not only are there going to be people on the left like us who will play it, but there's also people who just kind of as a meme, because they know that Disco Elysium was the commie game, they're just going to choose the communist answers.
Mm.
And I think they just
Yeah.
like completely unserved them. And it feels like, yeah, it feels like it's kind of LARPing as being vaguely leftist while not
Mm.
really giving it. I mean, as I think Ed said, we'll talk about the other two factions, and I think those are quite well, like you said, well described and well criticized. They're quite interesting. So I don't want to say it necessarily agrees with them, but I mean, frankly, I think the people who made this game of those three blocks, would like to live in Enter. I think that's the one which they prefer, because they seem like the best in the game, frankly, from the best ones to live in, even while they are also terrible in the game, And I got quite upset about that, because I think if you're going to, if they'd made a game that was, I suppose, if that had none of these like links to Disco Elysium, that had none of these things where they clearly put stuff in the game to be like Disco Elysium, I might have forgiven. But because they're trying to play off Disco Elysium and they've just like failed at the central ideology of Disco Elysium, I was quite angry about that by the end. I was like, that's
Mm.
just bullshit, man. So I think, I'd say overall, I think it's a decent game. And I think if this had no connection to Disco Elysium, I'd be like, wow, there's some really interesting politics in this. I mean, there's plenty of like, I don't know, liberal pieces of art that I have played that I'm like, wow, they were, obviously, I don't think they're comrades, but they've got some interesting angles in. They've got some interesting art, interesting ideology and politics in here. And I think it could have had that, but because it had all this Disco Elysium stuff in there, I feel like they have to live up to the ideology of it, and they don't. So that's
Mm.
my kind of number one big criticism of this game, and my big issue that I have with it, basically. Revealed.
Yeah, so I think we're in
Mm.
agreement on that as a take. I think the difference between at least my position and your position, Alex, I think, is that to me that doesn't ruin the game.
Yeah.
Like that sucks. That's a shame. That stops it being Disco Elysium level. But also, like, there are a lot of games that don't share my politics, and I basically agree. But I'm not that. It's a shame.
Mm.
It's a shame that it's not better. But like, I still think the politics are very interesting. Just only when we're not talking about Superblock, which is very boring.
Mm.
So should we move on to one of the other factions? Should we go for M
Yeah,
tier next?
sure. Well, just before I just want another like disappointment along those lines, which was I was disappointed that since as part of this game, not only will you encounter some of your old crew and even maybe have the opportunity to recruit them, but you also recruit some new people into this crew to do this objective you have at the end of the game. It seemed like that was a pretty obvious opportunity to meet someone who would be ideologically on the left, right?
Mm.
Okay, this is someone who's literally being recruited by the communist secret service, the opera they're called in the game, in order to like complete objectives for communism. Surely at least one of these people is going to be there because they ideologically agree with it. And none of them are, to be clear, none of them are. Like some of them are like they used to be, but now they're jaded. And like one good
Or some of them. Sorry,
one of them is like maybe a little bit, but they don't elucidate it particularly. And I'm just like, that was another great opportunity to like meet someone who would defend communism, one of the three factions in the game. And again, just it seems weird that they just don't take that. Sorry, Ed, you going to say that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm probably just talking about the same character as the last one you mentioned. I felt like one of them was more or less like a Trotskyist in their relationship to the Superblock.
Which one? Which one?
Where I'm forgetting the guy's name, but it's the guy from the other area that you have to go to, who's like this sort of scientist guy.
Right. I guess. I suppose. Yeah, I suppose you could see it that
because
way.
He has like his own different interpretation of how things should go. So like he's like a communist, I guess, but he's definitely not pro superblock. Is my memory
I
of
think
it
he
anyway.
specifically says that he's not a communist anymore. I don't think he. I mean, I see where you're coming from, but I think he says that he doesn't agree with like the ideology as a whole anymore. I think I'd have to double check that.
But maybe I
But yeah.
misremembered. I didn't spend too much time with that guy. But yeah. Yeah, should we talk about M tier?
Yeah, sure.
Well,
just to lay out what the point of M-tier was in the game is that they are essentially like the IMF, but like more so. Essentially, they're like the IMF in that they go around, they give loans to countries under terrible conditions, and then they just use that leverage they have of the debt that a country has to make them do political things in their favor, essentially employing neoliberalism. But this is now in the game has expanded to essentially being a full-scale state of these countries that have taken these effectively IMF loans. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think they're an interesting presence in the game because like they obviously are effectively speaking to the kind of states that we live in. They're talking about and they're talking about situations where M tier have backed rebels that have overthrown governments and stuff like that, and then given those rebels new massive stability loans, and all of that like speaks so directly to like the real experiences that people have had with the IMF and the way that they interact with world politics. I think it's good to see that portrayed in a video game. Like, it's interesting to have that sort of explored to some extent. One way it's explored, I guess, is that Portfolio, the place you're playing in. They have taken one of these loans, and they are now drowning in debt. And you're clearly not in a place which is like very well run. It's clearly not a great situation there. And I also think between La Luz and M tier, we're seeing the sort of two models of colonialism sort of happening at the same time. We're seeing like old school classic colonialism, and we're seeing the sort of neo-colonial relations of like the second half of the 20th century all happening at once. So I think it's kind of an interesting feature of the game that they have those two separate models of colonialism sort of compared with one another and explored in kind of an interesting way. I think La Luz is the most interesting one, or is explored the most extensively. But there are definitely at least like two characters in the game that you can have very extensive conversations with to like really understand what M tier are about. What do you reckon, Soph?
Yeah, I think M tier I didn't really get to know that much. I don't know. I feel like I just didn't really get that much exposure. I think maybe at the point, I thought maybe at the point that I was in the game, but maybe it's sort of broadly not as explored as much. But yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I didn't really get to know them that well at the point I was in.
I think the second of the characters that like really tell you a lot about M tier happens, like you meet them definitely in the second half of the game. So 12 hours, you're about halfway through. Like you might just not have met that character.
I think so.
Yeah, it's a while before you find out about it. But yeah, I do find it like an interesting, really like the idea of like super IMF basically is a really interesting one. And as I was saying, like if it wasn't for the disco stuff, I think this had some really interesting politics. But I do think, it blunts the criticism of it a little bit because, just like by the end of the game, I feel like they didn't seem that bad, really. Like, pretty much with the exception of one, maybe, and even then, they seem cool on a personal level. All the M tier people we meet are quite nice and even funny. And while Disco did this bit with Joyce, who was the emissary of capital basically in the game, and she's like also genuinely very nice and likable in contrast to ostensibly the guy running the union, who as a leftist you'd enjoy, who was personally quite odious, and that's kind of something they're doing there. It just felt like in this they're just like, well, these just seem like the nicest guys, right? Really, they're fun. Like the people I'd want to hang out with the most are M tier, and they don't do a great deal that's really horrible that you see, or even hear that much about. You kind of have to infer a lot of it.
I don't know that I agree with that. Like, I think the game is pretty clearly like anti-M tier. I think the game is. I think the thing is, the game is very clearly anti all three of the blocks. Like, it doesn't like any of them, so that gives it a kind of like slightly centrist-y, apolitical vibe to it. But I do think the game, it's against M tier and it's against M tier in interesting ways, and portrays why they're a bad faction, and it does that as well as also making the representatives that we meet of M tier be like, they're not horrible people, but they're like drug-addled, like maybe like hungover or like obsessed with various things. I think that's meant to speak to like the sort of obsessive unhealthiness of like the hyperfixation on money that capitalism like instills in people. So I don't really, I definitely wouldn't have said it was I don't think they were presented as like the nice ones or anything like that. I think they were presented as preferable to the fascists. But,
I don't
they're
I don't want to
also
say they like nice. I mean, again, I'd say overall, yeah, it doesn't think they're good, but compared to the others, like Superblock sounds shit, frankly. The fascists are fascists and bad and very bad. So I'm like, again, if I had to choose which one, based on what I've seen in this game, if I had to choose which one of these places I want to live, I'd probably want to live in MTER, and the fact, and that doesn't sit very well with me for this game, you know?
yeah. I think that's
Mm.
fair. But just highlighting for those who haven't played it, it's not like it's not a pro
No,
MT
no.
game. Like they're still the bad guys. Like one of the 3 sets. It's just that all 3 of them are bad guys.
Yeah. So the third one is La Luz, who is a techno-fascist regime. Entirely what they mean by.
Do you want to take this one?
So yeah, go on. If you
So
want,
sorry,
if
sorry.
you have beautiful prose to speak on La Luz.
Oh, I was going to say, do you want to take this
Oh,
one,
right.
Sophie?
God, again, I don't know if I've sort of gotten far enough to really
Well,
summarize it.
I was
But
just going to
mean,
describe what it was, and then we were going to talk
the
about it.
wolves, the wolf cups,
Wolf
those are
cups,
great.
yeah.
I
Everyone
got
loves
really
wolf cups.
interested. I got like when they introduced when they introduced the wolf TV show and the wolf cups and the kids who are obsessed with what's the show called? 99 Wolves or something?
66 wolves, I think.
66
Yeah.
wolves.
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
I just really enjoyed that. I guess I'm not really sure. Is it supposed to be sort of America
I mean,
or
I think it's supposed to be Japan.
Japan?
That's my take.
Interesting. Okay.
well, actually, I have a different take, but I will.
I
let me
trust
just
both
go,
of your
yeah.
takes more than mine. The sort of most memorable thing for me was the 99 Wolves and obviously the bootleg culture, and it made me weirdly think a lot about how we kind of have that weird relationship to America in South Africa is like this a lot of exported culture. So much so that like in recent years, more and more I've noticed like linguistically a lot of South Africans generally speak with an American accent or a slightly Americanized accent. I think because we are just like so culturally entrenched in American culture. That's kind of why I thought it was giving America for me. But yeah, whatever.
Cool.
No, I mean, to be fair, I've in my notes here I've written that they remind me of 2 places, Japan and the United States.
Which
So
that
I
totally
think
makes
it's
sense. I
only
can see
fair.
Japan as well, but yeah, Alex.
Go on, sorry, Alex.
Well, yeah,
Give
just
us,
to
give us
give
the
like overview
summary.
is that they are they call themselves techno-fascists. I'm not entirely sure where the techno comes into it. To be totally honest, I think there's some suggestion.
I think it would be a spoiler.
I know what you're talking about, but even that stuff, is that really would that even make it techno-fascism? I don't know.
Probably
But
not.
they are fascists at the very least, and they are trying to take over previous territory they've held, which includes Portofino. But it seems that right now they're trying to do it through a kind of a cultural takeover. They're beaming culture into these places they're trying to take over first. So this is done in one way. There's like appears to be like basically an anime, 66 Wolves, which has like a bunch of merchandising around and stuff. And there's also what's called L pop, which is some sort of type of pop. Who's the number one pop star is called Ultravioletta, and she ends up being involved in the plot. Basically, so my theory on what this represents, I do think, I see where you're coming with Japan and America in that it's like this cultural force that's like pushing its culture out. But it occurred to me that like this game, how much you can call it an Estonian game now anymore is unclear. I mean, this game is made in the UK. That's why they're organizing under the IWGB. Most of the original creative staff no longer work there. But I believe there is still some Estonian DNA in it. And I imagine in Estonia, that a big country that's looking to retake their previous empire is quite much Russia. And I imagine that Russian culture also does come out a lot more, influence things in Estonia a lot more than it would here, for instance. So I think they're kind of meant to be Estonia, although yes, there's like a lot of the aesthetics of Japan and America about that. That's kind of my interpretation of it. But either way, I think a general idea of it. Though basically, this is kind of the thing I thought was politically the most interesting in the game was La Luz. I think the idea of this like cultural colonialism was really interesting. I have a kind of a pet theory about the Soviet Union. And like to be clear, I'm no real Soviet historian, so don't at me if you think this is ridiculous. But my kind of like pet theory is that essentially the Soviet Union's greatest kind of failure, strategic failure, was cultural. That they everything was being imported outside of the Soviet Union into Soviet Union and not the other way around. So like the Soviet Union did not create rock and roll. They didn't create Star Wars. These are the things they should have done, is my theory. If I was running the Soviet Union, I would have gone hard on culture and like mass culture, entertainment, that kind of thing. That's what I would have done when I, like all good leftists, imagined how I would have saved the project of the USSR. Personally, in basic defiance of a collective will. But yeah, I thought like this as the idea of like an ominous encroaching threat to this place is cultural, and like it's basically impossible to stop it, and like the kids are all into it, and they haven't been able to stop that happening. I thought that was, even though there's like a blockade on it officially, I thought that was actually really interesting. That was something I did enjoy in the game.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting. Yeah, and Alex has already said this really, but yeah, they were an imperial power which then decolonized, but then since then they've taken back some of their less geopolitically important former colonies, and they're also doing this cultural stuff into the other places that they used to run, and that sort of sets up the fundamental conflicts mainly between Lelouch and M-Tier in the game. Like M-Tier have a cultural blockade on Lelouch. They're trying to prevent stuff from Lelouch coming into M-Tier, but the game is the story is about renegotiating that potentially, or seeing what the difference is. And I want to talk on this as well, actually, because before this game came out, in the trailer, they talked about the end of history, and I was a bit made my eyebrow, made me raise one eyebrow, and I mentioned this in the podcast, like that means something quite specific in the real world. And I wanted to know, like, how does that connect to a situation where there's clearly 3 different fundamental factions vying for power, when the whole point of the end of history in the real world is that it seems like there's completely cultural and economic domination by sort of one faction, essentially, i.e. Capitalism. But what it means in this game was, before this game takes place, there was a treaty 96 years before the game, which was designed to end wars. Like, it was a treaty it's called the Latour-Woolgar Treaty, and it's between Lelouch and M-Tier. But what we sort of uncover as the game goes on is that in reality, behind the scenes, things are much less ended than they first appear. Again, so that does mirror real life. Like, so in reality, the negotiations are sort of ongoing. It's a fake end to history. So again, I thought that was like quite an appealing aspect of the game. I thought that was good.
That's why they call it post-historical materialism, because it was at the end of after history, right?
Yeah, and yeah. So I think based on what I said a minute ago, you can see why I would have thought, like, why I think Japan. To be clear, none of us. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say none of us think that this is so like basic that Lelouch is literally meant to be a stand-in for one country. Like,
exactly.
That's not how this is working. But they remind me of Japan as like a former imperial power who have then put a lot of effort into like really softening their image culturally, like post the defeat of their empire, and putting a lot of effort into that aspect of it. And of course, yes, the United States, we're very much dominated by their cultural production as well as by a lot of the rest of their elements of them. And they've been able to really present themselves like as something that's cool and as the future, which they were able to do like to the USSR for the last decade of their existence. Like, everyone wanted blue jeans, everyone wanted to go to Pizza Hut and have their mediocre pizza and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's definitely speaking to all of that stuff. And I think it's just an interesting exploration of contemporary fascism. And there's one other element of it, which would be like definitely in spoiler territory, which we'll talk about in a minute, I think, which again, like, brings Lelouch to like the heart of what the game is saying in like a very direct way. So yeah, I don't know if we want to move towards the spoiler part.
I think we probably should. Apologies to Sofie, who will be having incredible.
Hopefully I'll forget.
That's always a plus side. Yeah. So I think we'll move into spoilers. I don't think we're gonna spoil the end of the game, partly because the end of the game is quite vague. Something that is quite different from Disco Elysium is that you can make a lot of your choices and stuff, and things can go very differently at the end of the game, from my understanding. I only finished it once, so I'm not entirely sure, but my understanding is like depending on who you choose as your crew to go and various other choices and decisions you make along the way, things can go very differently at the end of the game. So it's hard to say with any certainty what the end of the game even is. But we are going to talk more about things that happen later on and plot reveals that happen across the game. So why don't we get straight into that thing about Lelouch, which is the spoiler that it turns out that all the leaders of Lelouch are psychological copies of the same original guy, but now these copies are kind of fraying, and that's what's causing internal strife in Lelouch.
So I think that is an accurate summary, but I feel like it's if you just heard that in isolation, that would sound bad. But I think authenticity and like copying is a real theme of the game, like literally from immediately as soon as you start playing the game. Really early on in the game, like within the first 10 minutes, you'll get this red disc, which is then like one of the central hooks at the start of the game, like, oh, what's the deal with this red disc? Or like one of your friends is like seem to have gone comatose and possibly is dead, who knows, listening to this red disc. And so you're trying to like work out what it is, and you'll learn like relatively early on in the game that it's, I mean very early on in the game if you do it directly, that it's a music format which can only be played once. So there's something like, so literally right from the start of the game there's this like idea of something like being unique, being like original, being like a one-time thing that is there and then it's gone. And then this sort of idea is in so many different places in the game, it would be impossible to list them all. But I mean, another crucial one is this. You learn this probably like just before the halfway point. You probably have already got here, Sophie. You learn that your a sort of friend that you have in the area is dead, but they've imprinted their personality onto like their, I don't know what relationship they really have, like assistant, like a second in command, protege, So again, like very early on, and then consistently throughout, there's this theme of like making copies, this question of like authenticity, like what's real, even stuff like the characters have both a real name and a code name throughout, like a fake name. There's this question of like in authenticity versus authenticity in like the very identity of the characters that we're playing in. And so for Lelouch, yes, we learn later on in the game that there's this rumor that sort of gradually becomes more and more like definitely true, that the leadership of Lelouch are copies of copies of copies of copies of their founder going back like hundreds of years. And this is, to give my take on it, I think just like such an excellent critique of the like purity ideology of fascism, like taken to its logical conclusion in a way. Like it's not just like purity of like a particular, I don't know, skin color or race or whatever. It's literally the continuing continuity of like one specific man again and again and again and again. Like it's so like it shows the real like it shows like both why like fascism has like had a certain like effectiveness when it comes to like war and stuff historically, and also why like it's such a like pathetic broken ideology, like the myopia of it, you know. It's like there's just the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Like yeah, sure, I guess that gives you a certain kind of like focus of mind, like a certain centrality, because like you're like literally cutting out people with different like interests from you. But then we just see in this game that like it crumbles, like you just can't, like it just can't happen. The survival always is necessarily relies on combining the personality of the leader that's imprinting, like with the new. So even this this like base, this like most like pure copying format, even that can't survive. Even that can't protect itself from mixing with the new, because it still relies on imprinting on someone. And to be clear, when you imprint on someone, the personality of the original person's still there, like it's still a presence in that person, but they just sort of also have access to the personality, the memories, the being of the other person, like in some sense. So yeah, I just think I think it's a very funny, or like funny is the wrong word, but like very like fun, very like interesting and novel way of lampooning fascism, which is like I haven't really seen it done like this before, and it feels very real to the ideology. Like that does feel like a genuine critique of something that is actually there in like contemporary fascism. Like, so as opposed to the super block where their critique is, oh, communism's dull or blinkered or arcane or whatever, this is like actually speaks to something real about fascism, like the actual limitations of their ideology. And so I think that was like basically the best part of the game.
I did really like it. And it's like, it's kind of like, again, I think a bit like Disco Elysium, although I wouldn't really consider this a criticism of being too much, you know, of aping it, but like, it's got this like fairly grounded world. You know, it's not real, but it's like seems fairly realistic. And then when you get quite deep into it, there's like this weird kind of supernatural element to it. Esoteric element that's like in the background, which I do find quite fun. One of the other big kind of spoilers, again, kind of somewhat related, is the L-pop stuff, where you finally get to actually meet Ultravioletta who is looking to defect, essentially. And one of my problems with the game, actually, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, because I probably could have unspoiled this version of my criticism, but like, I do think that this game probably came in like quite hot. I think there were like probably issues quite late on, because there are a lot of bits in the game where you get the voice acting and the text on screen don't match, and like
Yeah.
sometimes
Quite
Yes,
a
that's
bit.
so true.
sometimes that's just trivial stuff, but sometimes it's like people's names are different, and like you're like, okay, well that's actually like this like implies that like things have changed in the story that they could not have time to go back and re-record stuff for, and that I think that happened a lot.
Can I speak to that real a moment, actually? Because I think I'm the only one of us that played the demo when that came out.
Yes, I didn't play it. Yeah.
So it was quite interesting to replay the first 5 hours and notice that like things had changed. Like there was a character in the demo who had been replaced with a completely different character who was much less important in the real game. The character that you speak to on the canal boat, like at the market, who's like not really that important. They were like much more prominent in the demo, and they were not. There was like an older woman who was like sort of posh, rather than like the kind of guy that they had in the main game. And like they've definitely featured much more heavily, and it's sort of interesting. Like what caused that? Like what? So there's clearly stuff was like still shifting about behind the scenes until very late on.
That boat guy is like there are like large amounts of where he has no voice line, and he has no voice acting, but then very occasionally it's just like, yes, I agree. And you're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So he has some, and I think they were going for 100% voice acting. There are some games where they only main characters have voice acting or something, but
it was clearly a mistake. Like when it happened the first couple times, I was like, oh, maybe it's just a one-off thing, or maybe this is a thing they're intentionally doing. And then, even when the narrator's lines would obviously be missing, or she would just say something different, I'd be like, oh, okay. Yeah.
I'd also say that I also had other like performance issues every now and again with the game. I'd say, I mean, I'm not sure if I said this on the podcast or if I said it before we started recording, but I did my entire playthrough of this game within the first week of it being out. So possibly any like glitch or issue that I highlight might have already been
some
fixed.
patches,
but in my play, there have. I think a patch came out like the day that I was finished the game. But for example, I had an unlimited money glitch.
Really?
That was in my playthrough. Have you? Yeah, that makes sense. I haven't really looked up to see what other people have sort of thought of the game, really. So I don't know what other people are saying about it. But I had a glitch where you could call your handler, Melita, and you can choose a line of dialogue where you ask her like where you could buy a gun. If you choose that line of dialogue, she gives you 30 soul, which is the currency in the game, and then it returns you back to the list of dialogue options, and that dialogue option is still there, so you can ask it again, and she'll give you another 30 soul. And I did it like 3 or 4 times just to see if there was a limit on it, and nope, you can do it every time. So I was like, all right, well, I should not do that.
Well, I mean, the big issue that I had, and again, this is going to spoilers, is you meet Ultravioletta, and elsewhere in the game, you discover that the red disc you mentioned that basically put your partner that you were supposed to be set up with at the beginning of the game into a comatose, that was based on these like space experiments. So these guys who went into space, they were doing psychological experiments, and they'd somehow found like some mantra of words that caused this to happen. And then somehow Ultravioletta found this information, and she took the words and put it into a song, and that's what makes people. This is like this like psycho weapon that can just like put people into comas permanently, basically. And you meet her, you cannot ask her about that. There's no options to talk to her about that, or like find out how any of that happened or what she was involved in that. It just doesn't come up. And it's possible that like maybe if I didn't talk to her at quite the right time for those. Really? Oh, you must have got lucky, because I'm just like, why can't I?
think so.
I found this fucking disc. Why can't I ask her about this disc?
I think you can ask her like where she got it from, like how did she come up with it, and then she's quite vague about it, and she says something like all of her ideas like come to her from like the ether or whatever, and then so it's implied that she sort of like has channeled this in some way, like she's like linked into the broadcast that's still like being emitted from that ship which has been destroyed, and it's sort of implied that she's like receptive of that in some way. And I think the production was like handled by Lelouch as well.
That's it. That is weird, but like
there's not much on it. There's like 1 or 2.
I mean that kind of. The fact that clear, like genuine, I went through all the options when I saw it, but like I was later on I was like, oh, there was a period of time when I should have tried talking to her before I did some more plot thing, because that might have changed something. But like I did speak to her extensively before that, so I think it's like indicative of they were like messing things around like very late in that game, which is weird for like the plot, right?
Yeah.
But like I did feel like there was not only is that just like, well, you know, there are technical issues sometimes, but like I felt like that like undermined it, because I'm like genuinely like, why? How is these things connected, and why isn't she talking about it? You know, it was a bit of an issue in that regard.
Yeah.
Are there
That's
any
fair.
other? There is another, actually, relating to the issues I had with the game politically. There is an issue a bit towards the end of the game where you have to essentially go on a date with this woman from MTER who previously in the game tortured you. She like unambiguously tortured you. And I was this is like, again, a bit where I got angry with the game, because it just like, I was just like, I don't want anything to do with this woman. She's a torturer, and she tortured me, and she's a liberal. So I don't want to fucking have a romance with this lady.
Both
Yeah,
equally bad.
exactly. Yeah. Who can say which is worse? I couldn't. Um, and so I'm just like, I come to this, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So she's going to keep trying to flirt with me, and I keep shutting her down. And again, basically pairs me down into like exhausting things where I eventually have to try and kiss. There's no like reason to kiss her. It just like forces me to do it. And I'm just like, but I didn't want it. Like I had pretty clear reasons to not want to do that. And I think they just assume that everyone's going to play. It's, oh, make him kiss, because people love to do that on the internet, right? But I don't know. It's just like, I was like, it felt like that was like part, like, okay, she's a liberal. And it's like, well, now I literally have to kiss the liberal because the game they didn't even conceive that I might not want to do that. And so it felt like the political issues of this game in like a little microcosm, you know? Even if it is maybe just a production issue.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or maybe, I don't know. I didn't like try and avoid it for long enough to notice that you couldn't go down a different
Yeah.
route. Do you know what I mean? I did a few options before that, and then I was like, well, do you know what? This does sound like it would be one of the more interesting options in terms of gameplay. So
Ed,
let's do it.
I'm not going to judge
but
you
I mean,
for wanting to kiss the liberal.
it's the only
I'm
thing
not
I
going to
did in
judge
the
you
whole
for
game.
it.
Kissed your own
It's the only thing.
torturer. What the fuck?
But
I got that far.
But I thought
I didn't get to the date though, but I did get to that scene though. As in, I saw the torture scene. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I think
sorry.
Ed might be confused because it sounded like you said kiss your own daughter.
You said your own daughter.
But I realised
Yeah,
you said
that's what I
No,
torturer.
torturer. Sorry. Kiss your own torturer.
Yeah, no.
Let's clarify that. for
Alex
our
was right.
audience.
No, kiss your own torturer.
This is an incest-free game,
As far as you
as
can
far as I can
That-
tell.
Listen, and she's a liberal. Equally as bad.
Yeah,
But yeah, I guess I would maybe you could charitably read that as like the Cascade
Yeah,
would definitely do it. Like, sure, you as a player might not want to, but Cascade definitely.
Yeah, I guess, but still, seriously, she's a fucking liberal torturer. Come on.
Yeah, I feel like we've covered the main.
Yeah, I
things.
think we can wrap up there. Do we have any?
I would like to play it some more. I do, because I was getting into it. But it is just one of those games that feels like a lot of effort to start up sometimes. And a friend of mine once described Disco as a game that you pour yourself a glass of wine with and you spend an evening playing. And I do agree. And I think in that same way, where I'm like, it requires a lot of mental energy and time to sort of set aside and really do a big chunky session, which I also don't have a lot of either of those things these days, could honestly just be that. Because it's like, I hear you talk about it, I'm like, man, I really want to be as invested in this game. I want to play it. I want to get it. So maybe I do just need to force myself.
Yeah, and for context as well, you said that it reminds you of like having a big book like that you need to get through. And I just want to, like, full disclosure, I like to read big books, but I'm like strangely, and this is a very unusual feature of me as a person, I'm like super happy to pick up a massive book and read one page like while I'm waiting for something else to happen and then put it down again. So for me, like popping in and out of like something really dense, I'm always happy with that. So I managed to find like ample time in my world in which to squeeze in 20 minutes here or 20 minutes there, whatever. So that might not, you know, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, that makes
listener,
sense.
when it comes to that.
Back when I talked about Disco Elysium, I said that I had a lot of trouble getting into it in the first time. I think I played it a little bit, and I couldn't do it, and I kind of pushed myself to do it again later.
Which is common. Yeah.
I think you probably just have the same issue, and you just the number one issue is that you just don't have that much time right now. And I think if you played these games at a time in your life when you had a bit more free time, then you would find it probably a lot easier. And I think you could probably get into it.
Fair. I've also just been playing a lot of games that are like, I have a little second screen content up, type thing.
Can't do that.
Like Disco and Zero Parades, you cannot do that. And it's like,
they are not podcasts.
really requires your full attention. So
apart from, of course, the Red Barrels podcast, which you can listen to in any circumstance.
We'll add to it. Absolutely.
We'll
anything you can think of at a funeral,
while you're talking to your family,
on the speaker while you're making love to your wife, whatever you want.
You're playing this game and
whatever
you're
you
like
want.
Just love to keep
frustrated at the ideological inadequacies. Put us on and regain your ideological purity by listening to the Red Barrels podcast.
Have us talk over the narrator. We'll soothe your frustration if you do find her voice grating.
Well, I think on that, I think we probably should wrap up. Sorry, everyone. I'm sorry that we can't talk for another 14 hours about Zero Parades. Maybe one day we'll do a 14-hour live stream for Patreon when we have that set up in
the future.
I think sometime in the next million years. We'll probably manage that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're done. That's it. We're really done. We talked about Zero Parades. As always, we're not going to beg. But, if you wanted to, share some socials.
You'd never beg.
Whatever, we wouldn't beg, no. We got more dignity than that. But hey, man, if you just want to share some socials and review us on Spotify and iTunes, we whatever.
No biggie, whatever.
NBD.
Deal or don't, it's up to you. Yeah.
But, if you were to do that, you could send them to find us on Twitter @RedBarrelsPod. Or on Blue Sky @redbarrelspodcast.bsky.social. For me personally, you can find me @AlexDean, ALEXDUIN on Twitter, and the same .bsky.social on Blue Sky. Sophie, how can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on twitch.tv/SoFreely.
Wow. She's here in the room with us.
Really good. Well done. Really good. If you want something less good than that, you can find me at Not a Lemon on Blue Sky or at Still Not a Lemon on X.
I'm gonna spare everyone my impression of the Zero Parades.
I'm going to spare everyone.
It's more like I'm going to spare.
That was my impression.
So no.
No, now you're just doing what's that fucking from
exactly.
I'm doing
good point, Sophie. Let's leave it there.
From
damn it.
Zero Parade. Oh, you Kuno.
Yeah.
You think they're accusing me of doing Kuno? It's quite clear.
Yeah.
How's
I'm
that?
fucking Kuno.
I played the original version of Disco Elysium before they did the Final Cut, when they had the original, much more grating voice for Kuno, and I feel like I deserve a badge for that. Yeah, exactly. As always, speaking of incredible sounds you can hear, the music is from Brilliant Drink and is brilliant as always. As always.
As brilliant as that segue.
Brilliant as that
Exactly.
drink.
You're not going to get better than that. But you could, if this is a brilliant drink, and they get...
That's showbiz, baby.
Exactly. But we are really done. We're going to be back next week. There is still upheaval going on in our lives. So there may be delays, but hopefully there won't be. Hopefully we'll be back next week with some news. We'll see. We've all got to just live and get by on in this crazy world and take what we can and get what we have. Goodbye.
Bye.